So if you were to write down bullet points, you'd say, I missed him here, I missed him here, I missed him here. So I want to see you here next Sunday. I'll be here to see you here next Sunday. And I will also be giving the sermon in the first and third service next Sunday in the cathedral. So the third service will be better than the first. You get a chance to practice. So if you were picking one, that's the one I would go to. So, those of you who are first time here today, welcome. I want you all to know how very grateful I am for you. And no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. Once upon a time, a crow found a piece of cheese. The crow flew up to a branch on a tree, planning to eat the cheese. A fox down below wanted the cheese for himself, so the fox began to flatter the crow. The fox told the crow how beautiful it was, and wondered if the crow's voice was as sweet as the crow's beauty. When the crow let out a caw to show off its voice, the cheese falls to the ground and the fox eats it. That's a great story. That's just a great story. That is probably one of the first stories I can remember having read to me as a young child. My grandmother, that mean one, she had a book of Aesop stories. Aesop. And Aesop was a Greek storyteller who was born, according to Wikipedia, in 620 BC, which is quite a long time ago, and he died at the age of 55 or 56. It's a great story. There was that wisdom, that Greek wisdom that was abounding in probably that first axial age, the Great Turning. We're in the middle of another Great Turning right now. But this is, and the Greek thought and stories influenced a lot that went on the Christian movement. And I bring Aesop up because there is a teaching attributed to Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, which actually comes from Aesop, not from Jesus. But it does, it is a saying that the Jesus followers inserted into the Gospel of Thomas to reflect what Jesus thought about religious leaders and to remind others of the Jesus movement to be cautious about people like me. That's good advice. Here's the teaching in Thomas. Cursed are your religious leaders, for they are like dogs sleeping in the feed bin. They do not eat, nor do they allow the cattle to eat. Now, another translation of this says, Jesus says, damn the Pharisees. They are like a dog sleeping in the cattle manger. The dog neither eats nor lets the cattle eat. Dogs don't eat cattle food, but if they're in the manger, the cattle can't get it either. Now, this teaching is coming from a man who said, don't judge. I said just a minute ago, and I said last week, that I think we are in the midst of a great turning. More and more people are interested in the things we talk about in here. There's a growing population of people like you, people who are interested in psychological and spiritual truths. And the further I have gone down the path, the more I see that it's impossible to separate psychology and spirituality. They fit together. And there are more and more people out there who are interested in doing something to right the social injustices that exist around the world. I know many of you subscribe to Richard Rohr's daily meditations that come from an organization called the Center for Action and Contemplation. They fit them together. Social action and contemplation. Now I know it's possible to look out at some of the things that are going on in the world, the things that manage to make the headlines in our various media, and disbelieve that this great turning is taking place, but it is. Think about it this way. You and I are among the first. We are the first generation in the history of the world to know what we know about the era in which we live, the physics in which we live, and to know what we know about ourselves who are living in this physical world. It was Ilia Delio who opened the door on this for me. I knew something about the new discoveries that were being made about the nature of the cosmos, but she put it in a way that absolutely captured it for me and captured me. The size and age of the energy field we call the cosmos is so enormous that the human mind cannot grasp it. I remember Ilya saying to us who were gathered at that first conference years ago, you likely grew up being taught that we live in a galaxy called the Milky Way and that maybe there are 2 or 3 other galaxies out there. And she said, let me tell you what we know now. There are over 300 billion other galaxies out there. And this energy mass is expanding and evolving. She said, you cannot get your mind around the enormity of the energy field in which we live. You cannot comprehend it. And then the same kind of discoveries are being made at the quantum physics level, where you go down into the minuteness of particles. And some spiritual readers, the teachers that I'm reading, particularly in the areas of Sufism, are connecting Sufi topography, the Sufi way of looking at things. Sufi is mystical Islam, with quantum mechanics, and they're seeing this incredible overlay between the two. Further, neuroscientists are saying that what we're discovering about the brain is analogous to what we're discovering about the cosmos. The brain is far more complex and massive in its workings than we ever imagined. The brain can no more comprehend itself than the brain can comprehend the cosmos. Perhaps the most incomprehensible thing is that we can comprehend any of this to the degree that we can. And we are the first generation to know that. This is not to say that everyone knows about this firstness, but for anyone who is interested, if they have access to the technology, this information is out there. Now, for some people, such as myself and you, this increased knowledge and information has been so incredibly liberating. Just wonderful to know. But for some people, it's terrifying. It has created deep wells of idiocy and denial and an increase of intensity and stupidity among fundamentalists of all stripes in every religion. because they make claims for their religion that cannot stand scrutiny. We are the first. And we're the last. We, and I notice looking out at the age of some of you, not even this could be said about you, we are the last generation to know what it was like prior to the digital revolution. In getting ready for the sermon that I'm preaching next Sunday, I remember talk about divine entanglement. The gospel for next Sunday is a gospel text that I was assigned in a Greek exegetical homiletic graduate seminar, which is just as bad as it sounds. I was assigned a parable of Jesus to study for 4.5 months. And so I had to do all this research, and I used the Google of the time, which was a card catalog. Remember those? The digital revolution has brought us enormous benefits. But we're also paying an enormous price because of the constant attention our devices are asking of us. For example, our relationship skills are diminishing. Rudeness is on an increase. A lack of civility seems to be on the increase. I saw this cartoon just this week. Hold on, some Luddite is trying actually to talk to me face to face. This past week, my wife was driving down Rice Boulevard and saw a young pregnant woman on a bicycle without a helmet texting. No. Now that's crazy. People are free and willing to hide behind the anonymity that some forms of digital communication affords them to say things they would never say, publicly or personally. Now, I'm not glorifying the good old days that past some people seem to want to return to, were also days of limitation of all sorts. But I would raise up the issue of what's been lost and the price we pay for living in a world of constant connection. Constant connection causes us to pay only partial attention to some of the most important things in our lives. I have 2 teenage granddaughters, and when they first got them and they would come to our house for dinner or whatever, I would take their phones away from them. It did not make me popular, but they got to the habit where they realized when they walked in the door, they just hand me the phones. And then one last big family gathering at our house, I noticed they walked in, handed me the phone. Eventually we sat down for dinner, 9 of us, and they were so polite. And they have iWatches. So, you know, when Gutenberg invented the printing press, that invoked a massive revolution. It took centuries, though, for that revolution to become fully unpacked. Our technological revolution has evolved with astounding speed. There's a friend of ours who owns a house just on the north side of Eleanor Tinsley Park, where the 4th of July fireworks display is set off here. And so every 4th of July we go there and watch the fireworks. You know that Houston has the largest land-based fireworks display of any city in the country. Now that said land-based, so that leaves out New York, Boston, and San Francisco. But the largest land-based fireworks display is right here, and it's magnificent. I just love fireworks. Equally impressive for me this year were the 2 drones flying about the display, taking and sending back for broadcast pictures of the fireworks display as it was taking place. I gotta have one of these. There is a man in our church. I don't see him here today. Sometimes he attends this class. They live in a high-rise near here. And one day he and his wife were out on their balcony enjoying a glass of wine. And they looked out and there was a drone parked, 30 yards from where they were. Now, if I had a shotgun, would that be a time to use it? And we got some issues to face about privacy and a variety of things with them. So being both the generation that is the first and the last gives us an interesting vantage point in which and from which to look at what we've lost and what we've gained. You know, we used to look to our elders for wisdom and guidance about stuff. We don't do that anymore. We look to our kids. Not for wisdom, but for guidance and how do I work this thing. Social anthropologists are saying that we're retaining less wisdom and knowledge because we don't need to. It's all instantly available. Not the wisdom, of course, but the knowledge, the information. It's just right there. If I want to know something, I can stand in my kitchen and ask Alexa. Or I can hold up my device and ask Siri. I no longer remember phone numbers. I used to. I remember the first phone number we had when I was a child. It was 401M. One scholar has referred to our condition where we can know everything but know nothing as feeling stupid. It's a combination of smart and stupid. You ask me a question, I don't know, but I'll find out. Alexa, what is it? Or we're being trained to look at our lives through the lens of only what is share-worthy. You know, what can I post on Facebook or Instagram or whatever? While at the same time ignoring what these services do in mining data from us for advertising. And we've learned not to see this as an invasion of our lives, but rather it's the small price we pay for not only being constantly connected, but also having our every whim instantly gratified. The other day, I misplaced my phone, which I carry in this case. And I looked, and I looked, and I looked. I could not find it. So I went on my desktop computer to a service called Find My Phone. It located that my phone was somewhere in my house, but I couldn't find my phone, so I activated a service on Find My Phone that said, make my phone make a sound. And it did, and I found it. That means that somebody knows where I am all the time. And I've wondered about Alexa. I can stand in the kitchen and say, Alexa, what's the weather like in Boston? And she will tell me. And that made me wake up one day to the realization, Alexa is listening to everything I say. Now they say that it they say that it only retains information for 90 seconds. But they don't say how long it stores it for. What logarithm does Amazon Prime use to know what I'm going to want next? But it does. You might be interested. Well, of course I would. Send it to me. We were out having dinner with friends of ours not long ago, They are both multi-degree PhD people. One is in the field of biology and one is in the field of knowing everything about the brain and all that. And we were having dinner at a local restaurant, and the table next to us was a family, and sitting at the table was a 2-year-old with an iPad mini who was entertaining himself using the iPad mini, right, at that age. And what that got was a conversation started about how our wet brains, these are our wet brains, are actually being modified by our interaction with our dry brains. And the younger you are, the more intense that modification occurs. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying this is the reality in which we live. Now, a person will not automatically participate in this great turning that I believe is coming. I thought of it was another example of divine entanglement when I was putting the finishing touches on this talk for today, and I got Richard Rohr's daily email. I want to read you 2 brief paragraphs. This is Rohr. I know the situation in the world can seem dark today, but we are seeing theological regression into fundamentalist religions, which believe all issues can be resolved by an appeal to authority. That's either to hierarchy or scripture of some sort. And so there's no need for an inner life of prayer. In the United States, we've seen the rolling back of a compassionate economic system and the abandonment of our biblical responsibility for the poor, the sick, and refugees. Fear and anger seem to rule our politics and our churches. We see these same things in many parts of the world. The negative forces are very strong, and the development of consciousness and love sometimes feels very weak. But a great turning is also happening, as believed and described in many ways by such people as Teilhard de Chardin, Thomas Berry, Joanna Macy, and David Corton. There is a deep relationship between the inner revolution of prayer and transformation of social structures and social consciousness. It takes a certain mindset, a certain stance in the world. I believe, and you would expect me to say this, that we have to take up a deliberate, conscious practice of seeking and seeing the sacred in ourselves, in each other, and in the created world. And this ought to be the function of authentic religion and religious teachers. A problem is that religion, any religion, can go inauthentic in a heartbeat. Not only inauthentic, but unwise, dangerous, damaging. Now, since I myself cannot remember sometimes what happened yesterday, I just want to take an opportunity to give you a brief summary of a few of the things that constitute the canvas on which these ordinary life talks are painted. Things that make up the operating system that's constantly running in the background of these talks. Years ago, I knew, influenced by a multitude of factors, that the religious structure in which I had been born and raised, that of Southern Baptist, was too confining, that it did not serve me well. So I wanted both to experience and express something that was open and inclusive. Open and inclusive as I see God to be. I wanted to be open to new light from wherever it came. So I came up with a phrase, which I think is original with me, that we are to be involved in the process of becoming centers of freedom and love. Now you see there's no religious connotation to that. You can be Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, doesn't matter. To be involved in the process of becoming centers of freedom and love. Each one of those words we could spend a week on. We're to be involved, not spectators. Life's not a spectator sport. You jump in the water and you swim. We're to be involved in the process of becoming. There's not a steady state. There's no place to get to except the grave, which is there for all of us, and we live in light of that without morbidity. We're to be involved in the process of becoming centers, not fragmented, not split apart, but centers. The colloquial phrase for this is getting your stuff together. We are to be involved in becoming centers of freedom, which I think is the highest definition of what it means to be a human being. And most people confuse freedom with license. And we are to be involved in the process of becoming centers of freedom and love. Now, the Christian language, the Christian myth, is part of my DNA. I grew up with it. It's just there. I use that language. But I don't know, because there are so many definitions, what you think it means to be Christian. Now, I said, I think this phrase originated with me. It did not come out of a vacuum. I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago that my path in pursuing matters of mind and spirit was formed primarily by three important figures, and I think they came to me in this order. The first was a German theologian by the name of Rudolf Bultmann, who was a New Testament scholar, and he gave to me the phrase authentic existence. He said, if somebody turns away from the message of Jesus, don't let it be because they reject a three-storied universe or the literal natures of miracles or something like that. Let it be because they hear Jesus clearly calling, live an authentic life, and they turn that down. So I like that phrase, authentic existence. I'm still working on what it means. And then I was found one day by Harry Emerson Fosdick and his similar sounding but very different call to be a real person. Fosdick was an outspoken opponent of fundamentalism. You can go on the internet, as some of you have done, and read his sermon, Shall the Fundamentalist Win? It is still as relevant today as it was when he first gave it. And it's hard for us to believe now in this world, but when Fosdick preached at Riverside Church in New York City, the New York Times sent a reporter to church on Sunday to cover his sermon and write about it in the paper the next day. Being a real person for Fosdick meant an engagement in the world as it is in a way that opens us up to a certain set of values. And I've talked to you about those values of generosity and kindness and compassion, those things. And then third, of course, I would have to put Carl Jung, which includes all the teachers and trainers I've had. And from them I got, from Robert Johnson years ago, the phrase, journey into wholeness. Now, all of ordinary life ought to be about these things. I think all authentic, wise, useful religious teachings ought to be about these things. I wanted, and this too is part of the background operating system, to contribute to spiritual and religious literacy. I really do believe that the salvation of the world lies in our being educated. That we are brothers and sisters. If we could get that, we'd stop killing each other, blowing each other up, denigrating each other, being hateful to each other. The salvation of the world depends on our being educated about being kind, about knowing something of our true nature as shaped by the true source of love from which we came, to which we return, and in which we live. The song of my Southern Baptist youth still rings true to me. Brown or yellow, black or white, we are all precious in God's sight. It's just that in our sight, this falls away. And sadly, religion misunderstood is easily religion misused. It is sad to me that the very teachings of Jesus help people enter, that are designed to help people enter into the realm of sacred mystery of the here and now, have been used to denigrate other religions or to force people to convert to some form of Christianity. Now, I have said things like this in here before and in other places outside of here. And inevitably, I don't get this much in here anymore, but inevitably somebody will come up to me and say, yes, but. What about that teaching where Jesus says, I am the way, no one comes to the Father but by me? What about it? Well, first of all, I believe that Jesus is the way for those who choose to follow Jesus. But if you are going to use that line, use it in context. In the Gospel of John, from which that line is taken and many more like it. Read it. Jesus did not say, hey guys, I'm going to give you a set of secret instructions, which if you follow, you go to heaven when you die, and other people who don't have this won't. Won't that be cool? That's not what he said. What he says in John is, listen, stay close to me, and I'll get you where you need to be. Into the heart of God, right here, right now. That's where you belong. That's where you came from. And when you are there, you can live out my message of love and forgiveness, healing, and inclusion. Follow me. Folks, religion isn't a matter of knowing about. Real religion is a matter of knowing. Jesus' first disciples were clueless over and over again about his message. They got caught up in wondering who's in, who's out. Oh, man. That's a theme for our global culture right this minute. Who's in, who's out? Even some who call themselves Jesus' disciples and followers now show more preoccupation with who's in and who's out. And it gives rise for me to the uncomfortable suspicion that some folks are not going to be happy being in unless they're pretty sure a lot of other folks are out. That's what the hellfire and damnation preaching that I grew up with was based on. That's what all the Left Behind books that have been so popular are based on. And condemnation of those who don't fit some culturally defined sexual norm or racial norm or economic norm or education norm. All those exclusionary teachings, they're all about that. You're out. I think my religious sensibilities were also shaped by the racist culture in which I live. We still live in a racist culture. But I was raised in Tennessee in the 50s, involved in the civil rights movement. And those are not easy times. Those are not fun times. If you've not heard Ruby Sales' interview on Krista Tippett's program on Being, please listen to it. I beg you. Just go to On Being, search for Ruby Sales, and take an hour to listen to that interview. This African-American woman who says that the question we need to be asking each other is, where do you hurt? Not, here's where you're wrong. Those 50s were a time of great chaos and fear in this country. And it was the era, some of you might remember, of Senator Joe McCarthy. And it was an era that, on the other side of that, was the attempt at racial integration, which we did not succeed at. I grew up 50 miles from Vanderbilt University and came within that close of going. There was a theology professor who was Baptist, by the way, at Vanderbilt University, whose name was Nels Ferre. And he wrote a book in the 50s that I did not read until the 60s Ferre has written a number of books, 3 of which that I have read. He wrote a book called The Christian Understanding of God, which is really a scholarly book. And then he wrote a book called The Son of the Umbrella. He also wrote another book called Christ and the Christian. That first book, as I said, is really for the academic community, but The Son of the Umbrella stirred up, it's hard to believe now, but this book stirred up such a firestorm in the 50s that Nels Ferre had to leave Vanderbilt and find another place to teach. And he went to Andover Newton to teach. This book, you can't get it now. I mean, you can probably go to a secondhand bookseller and get it, but it's such a breath of fresh air. And in this book, Ferre shows how the Bible, the church, and even the teachings of Jesus can be used as an umbrella to keep people out of the warming sun of God's love and grace. Now, nobody likes to be told they live in the dark, but that's what Ferre did. And he was very difficult to deal with. He was too much, he was too evangelical to be ignored by the Southern church. I can remember one of my theology teachers, when I found this book and took it to him, I said, "Do you know Nels Ferre?" He said, "Yeah." And you know, he's very liberal, as if that were a bad thing. And then my professor said, "But you know, I'd rather have Nels Ferre pray for me than any man I know." Ferre was also very smart. He could not be easily defeated in argument. You Google his name and you can just see what a controversial figure he was. He was a pacifist. He thought an insistence on things like the virgin birth were a distraction. And he said these things out loud in a time in the culture where it just was not the thing to do. He was called a communist, when, believe me, that was the worst thing you could say about a person. We replaced that a few years ago by saying, you're not a communist, he's New Age. Now, I bring Nels Ferre up because he talks about the dangers of literalism and fundamentalism by telling the story. The story, in brief, is that to keep from being burned by the sun, people built this huge umbrella so everybody could live under this sacred canopy. But they knew that the light was important, so they told a story about it to those who lived under the canopy who had never seen the sun. And that story is the Bible. Then they invented a light to resemble the sun by lighting a candle and putting it in a lantern which they enclosed so the wind wouldn't blow it out. The lantern was the church, and the light was Jesus. And Ferre's point was that sometimes the very things we create to reveal God, the doctrines and the dogmas, the rules and the regulations, end up concealing God. Now, as I said, don't know what you mean when you say you are a Christian. But I think Christianity is not about believing in Jesus. Christianity is about having a relationship with the God of Jesus. And I believe that that relationship will ultimately not leave us unchanged. I think this is very simple. I think this is very orthodox in the best, truest sense of that word. Now, this is what had happened in the Judaism of Jesus' day. It had become a set of rules and doctrines and who's in and who's out. And though Jesus was not the only prophetic voice to rail against what was happening in Judaism, he did become the most effective. And over to the establishment, he said, "You've got it wrong. You have been entrusted with a great truth. And not only are you not yourselves living it, but you are blocking other people from being nourished by it." So, let's talk about organized religion for a minute. I'm ambivalent about all organized religion. All of it. Now, I'm going to limit myself to what's gone under the banner of Christianity. Christianity and Christian organizations have done a tremendous amount of good in this world. A tremendous amount of good. Almost all hospitals, almost all orphanages have been started by Christian faith-based groups. A Christian church makes this gathering possible. We have this opportunity here. Most of the humanitarian work done around the world is started in faith-based organizations. Ordinary Life, this class, has been involved in funding and resourcing after-school and tutorial programs here and overseas, in Bolivia, particularly in St. Petersburg, Russia. We've been involved in AIDS work in Malawi. Some people in this class have been physically to places like Bolivia and Africa. We are involved right now in microfinance projects around the world, helping mostly women because God don't pay their money back. We're involved in, I shouldn't have said that. We're involved in microloan projects that are explicitly directed toward providing clean water to people who otherwise would not have clean water. A lot of good. But there's the negative side to organized religion and Christianity too. Almost 500 years of transatlantic slave trade that maimed, raped, killed, kidnapped, and enslaved 20 million African heathens to bring them to Christ. Genocide of Native Americans done under the name of Christ as the white man's manifest destiny. Not to mention the Salem witch trials, the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades. In Central Africa Republic, Christian militias have destroyed every single mosque in the country. In America, white supremacists are the single largest terror group to American security. That's according to the FBI. Just in the past 10 days, there has been a new revelation of further pedophile cover-up in the Roman Catholic Church. That's evil. The fact that the KKK still exists, that Nazis still exist, that the Aryan nations still exist, does not speak well for the message of Jesus being effective in the world. You go check yourself and see who Jesus spent the most time being critical of. And see who spent the most time opposing Jesus. Now, I myself am comfortable allowing Jesus to be the way. Not to be the way to get to heaven, but to be the way to be. I saw this cartoon this week. Freedom of religion is good. Freedom to mock religion is great. I think it is a misreading of this teaching of Jesus to take it to mean that we have open season on any institutional religion or religious person, just to blast them as we please. That's a straw man exercise. The early followers of Jesus inserted this well-known saying from Aesop into the teachings of Jesus as a warning not to block or be blocked in the experiencing or expression of what Jesus was about, and that is the communication of the graciousness and the love of God. Now, I don't know about you, but I need to pay attention to that ego stance of righteousness in me that blocks the experience and expression of kindness, generosity, and justice to anybody. There's another voice from the ancient world that I would raise up. It's that voice of Socrates. Again, Socrates was 4 centuries before Jesus. And Socrates is the one who said, the unexamined life is not worth living. You know, he said that at his trial. And he was on trial because he encouraged his students to investigate things and have open, honest discussions about things where there could be respectful disagreement about things. And the powers that be in his time said, we don't need that. And so they was found guilty of inciting all this upset among those who were his students. And so they gave him a choice. You can go to prison for the rest of your life, you can be exiled, send you to another country, or you can die. And he chose to die. Because he believed that the alternatives he was offered would have robbed him of the only thing that made life worth living, which is examining the world around him and discerning how to make the world a better place. Now, we're living in a culture, not for the first time in history, that seduces people not to live examined lives. If I am constantly doing this, I'm not being stupid and knowing. There is a saying, it doesn't come from Buddhism, it comes from a theosophical movement much later. The saying is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So the teacher's here. And the teacher, whoever he or she is never in your life to judge you, unless you're blocking kindness, generosity, and justice in somebody else's life. And then, if that's the case, you and Jesus need to have a talk. The teacher only wants to ask what umbrellas block your experience of the sun. So how's it going with you? How's it going with the immediate, concrete experience you have with yourself? What's the internal chatter? You know, you talk to yourself all the time. What's the internal chatter? Is it critical? Is it loving? How's it going in the immediate, concrete relationships you have with other people? My teacher said to me in talking about love of neighbor, he said, Bill, you don't have to eat with everyone, but don't kick anybody out of your heart. So at the risk of quoting him too much today, I want to show you just one more brief quote from Richard Dory. We are either a people who love, embrace, and enter into a caring posture with our family, friends, neighbors, strangers, and even enemies, real or imagined, or we will spend our lives mercilessly trying to define who is lovable, who is not, who deserves my attention, who does not, and inevitably we end up loving people who look like us, think like us, pledge allegiance to the same flag, and we will exclude the rest. In this truly useless pursuit, we will separate ourselves from God through tribal worship, from the world's good by avoiding healing and restoration, and from our very own souls through preoccupation with the ego. Everyone on this planet, just like you, and every aspect of who you are lives and moves and has their being inside the Sacred Heart or the love energy from which we all came forth. Everyone belongs. Everything belongs. And our spiritual calling is to make this truth manifest in our lives and then in the world. Our spiritual calling is to remove whatever umbrellas block our awareness of this or any person's experience of this. That's my rant for today. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo, so watch your step, and I will see you here next week. Thank you.